I'm Robert Novak with Insights. My guest is Seymour Hersh, investigative reporter and author. Seymour Hersh, born Chicago, Illinois, age 60. Education BA, University of Chicago, 1958. Residence, Washington, D.C. Police reporter, Chicago City News Bureau, 1959-60. Correspondent, Associated Press, 1963 to 67. Investigative reporter, New York Times, 1972 to 79. National correspondent, Atlantic Monthly, 1983 to 86. Correspondent, The New Yorker, 1992 to present. Seymour Hersh has built a reputation for exposing scandals many influential Americans do not want to know about. He won the Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting in 1970 for uncovering the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. His previous books have targeted Henry Kissinger and chronicled the stockpiling of biological weapons by the U.S. military. In his new book, his seventh, The Dark Side of Camelot, Hersh's careful reporting lays bare the reputation and the myth of John F. Kennedy. Cy Hersh, you have made a lot of people mad over the years with a lot of books tweaking the establishment. Have you ever gotten as fierce a negative reaction from influential people as you have on this book about JFK?
Not even close. This has been almost horrible, really.
Why is that, do you think?
I think because a lot of people cling very close and dear to myths, and one of the myths is that John F. Kennedy was a great president. I think you could also argue it's the power of beauty. He was beautiful. People loved him. A lot of Americans they treated Kennedy sort of like it wasn't, John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline weren't just the president and the first lady, they were the king and queen. We like royalty in America. This country went as batty about Princess Di when she was killed as the English people did. We really do like it.
If you had written this kind of book about Richard Nixon on the Republican side or Lyndon Johnson on the Democratic side, would you have gotten this kind of reaction?
Nope.
Why is that?
Well, you're asking an obvious question. I'll give you an obvious answer. Because a lot of Democrats want to believe, this president too, want to believe in the myth of John F. Kennedy, that he was a good president and a good man. And they think it's good politically to have this idea out there. And here I come, sort of poisoning the well, so to speak. And nobody wants to hear that. Bob, I did the same thing for this book. You mentioned the My Lai massacre, the same kind of reporting. Go find people, ask them questions, make sure they are who they say they are, corroborate what they do, put it down in some halfway readable form. There's no poetry here, obviously, and get it out. And so when I did it for My Lai, or for writing about Henry Kissinger or the CIA abuses for the New York Times, I won prizes and hosannas. I did the same thing here, and I'm accused of, let's see, in the New York Times of deceit. I'm accused of having no sources, fabricating things. It's pretty amazing.
One more comparison. If in 1980 somebody had written a book about Franklin D. Roosevelt, which would be the comparable period of time that had elapsed since Roosevelt's term had ended, with Kennedy's term ending, and had written that Roosevelt was a philanderer, he was deceitful, he was tricky. He had written all this kind of stuff. Do you think people would have been much interested in it?
That's a hell of a question, because I'll tell you the one thing you couldn't do about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, you have to acknowledge something, that he saw the moral issue in going after the Nazis, when a lot of Americans did not, including, by the way, Joe Kennedy, who was his ambassador. What you're saying to me is...
Who was almost pro-Nazi. Almost.
He was pro-fascism because he thought it was good for the bank book. That was his basic thing. So Hitler, made the trains run on time, much better than communism. Anyway, the point is that FDR had one thing. What you're saying is there were a lot of things in FDR that, he wasn't against wiretapping. He wasn't against... but there was nothing like John F. Kennedy. You can't compare the two.
But I mean, even if you had dug up that stuff, I don't think there would. In 1980, he was a distant memory John F. Kennedy is not a distant memory for some reason.
He wasn't as beautiful, FDR, as John F. Kennedy, wasn't as photogenic. John F. Kennedy's greatest love affair, despite the fact he's, pretty wild when it came to that side of his life, reckless. But his great love affair was not with women, it was with men, and particularly in the press corps. They adored him. The American press, the Washington press corps in particular, really was very fond of him. He was one of theirs. And you're right. The answer to your question is that you're absolutely right. There wouldn't have been the fuss. But don't forget that FDR was not shot down in the peak of life, in the peak of his beauty. He died a natural death, and we were more or less anticipating it. It was pretty well, in 44, we all knew it was coming. Those of us who are young enough to remember.
And you've been president for 13 years, not 3 years.
Right.
Yeah. Cy, the dark side of Camelot indicates if there's a dark side, there has to be a light side. You don't try to describe the light side in your book, do you?
I make it clear at the very beginning of the book. There's much been written about the good things. He did stand up on civil rights, albeit reluctantly. He just talked about the right to vote as a moral issue. He went to the moon. He was a young and dynamic and vigorous. He, I think, made Washington seem like an attractive place. He didn't attack the bureaucracy. He made it seem wonderful. All these things have been written and written and written. There's no false advertising in this. It's called The Dark Side. I'd like to, maybe I should have put it in plain white wrapper or something like that, like one of the magazines. But, but basically, I'm basically leveling the guy. I'm just, Bob, I'm just doing what I always did. I never thought it was as bad as it was. I never did.
When you started?
Oh, no. I had no idea this guy was as reckless as he was, across the board.
And what you say implicitly is that you don't think he was a good president and you don't think he was a good man.
Yes, I say that almost explicitly, too, in a way. And the horrible way to look at it is, it could be even, I didn't say this in the book because I didn't have the guts, which is that, what happened to him may have been rough justice, too. This is a guy who was trying to kill foreign leaders, when even his own intelligence community, the CIA in particular, was saying, Mr. President, enough is enough. We don't have any assets. Fidel Castro he was trying to kill. Very simply, if you want, I'll just tell you what I thought I had going in. It wasn't my idea. A publisher said, do it. Offered me some money. That's not unimportant in this world. And so I went and started a book. And I knew one thing.
You worked on it 5 years, right?
Yeah. I looked, I spent, the first couple of years, the first thought was, let's look and see. I thought maybe looking at his death, looking at the assassination to see if there's anything new. I was skeptical. But then I concluded, let's look at how he lived and see what that tells us about how he died. And the one thing I had going in, Bob, I had what in horse racing they call an overlay. I had a sure winner. In 1970s, there was the Senate Intelligence Committee hearings into the assassination attempts by the CIA of Castro and others. And all the CIA guys, Helms and Richard Bissell, the head of operations, Dick Helms, the head of the CIA, go before the committees and they say, who authorized you? And they stand back and forth and harump and they say, well, we're not sure. And one thing you know is, if the CIA, if Dick Helms says to the Senate, Daddy sent me, the president wants this done, the CIA's out of business. I mean, it's an impossible question. So I knew 15, 18 years later, I would go back to some of the retired agents, and they would say on the record, of course the White House wanted this, and of course we couldn't say that. That's one of the pluses and minuses in my book of the CIA. The CIA is an agent that belongs to the president. It's an executive agency. The president can tell him to do any heinous act at once. And the notion of plausible deniability is very important in America. You protect the president at all costs.
As I read your book, and I read that you had an interview with somebody in 1994, a man in his 70s, a woman in her 70s, somebody in 1995, 1997, and I got the feeling you caught the last train out with these people. I mean, they're not going to be around. If you hadn't done this, we would never know in detail these things, would we?
One of the questions I'm asked is why didn't for example, some of the women he saw, why didn't they come forward? Boy, do I have a good answer. If anybody had tried to go and say, I did Jack Kennedy in the White House where Jackie was next door, powdering her nose, who would believe him? Look at the heat I'm getting with all my prizes and, New York Times and all the establishment credentials I have. I was a press secretary to a guy running for president. You can't have more establishment credentials than I do, and I'm getting mauled.
Who was press secretary, were you?
G. McCarthy, when he challenged Lyndon Johnson for the presidency, for the Democratic nomination in '68. And that was the anti-war. McCarthy's issue was Vietnam. McCarthy, by the way, as I'm sure you know, was no lefty. I mean, he was against the war. He believed in NATO. He believed in the CIA. That's why I met a lot of people in the CIA working for him. He believed in fighting communism. He was a pretty middle-of-the-road guy who just thought
Devout Catholic.
Oh, boy, and did I hear about that? A much better Catholic than John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
He remembered those days.
I think one of the most fascinating things about the book, though, is that you do have some unnamed sources who didn't want their name to be mentioned, but they are the exception rather than the rule. Most of these are on-the-record quotes from people who were not second-hand sources, but first-hand sources.
Well, you know, and I actually kept some stuff out that was sensitive because it was off the record. For example, I did see Dick Helm, who didn't want to be quoted, and he gave me some guidance, but I didn't use anything he told me, not even anonymously, because I knew I'd be subject to great scrutiny. I didn't think it would be so crazy. I didn't think I'd be kissed off as not having any sources. As the first week when the book came out, everybody immediately said, there's nothing here.
I was at a party, an A-list party just before Christmas, of the kind I usually don't get invited to because I'm a little bit of an outsider.
Give me a break, please.
But anyway, and I had been reading your book, and I asked a lot of people two questions. The first question was, what do you think of Cy Hirsch's book? I said, absolutely terrible. This is bipartisan Republican Democrat. And I said, have you read the book? No. Now that is the establishment reaction, but of course there are, shall we say, hundreds of thousands of Americans who are reading the book.
What happened is because of the initial adverse reaction, as people begin reading the book, they see it's different. And word of mouth is great because, and I also went out, did talk radio, which is, I think, a vibrant, really an alternative media here. And you can go above, around the newspapers. You can. Politicians have done it. I'm starting, I'm a Be Kind to Richard Nixon, Be Kind to Janet Reno club these days. It's sort of being at the other end of it is a little scary because it isn't necessarily rational. When the press gets something in their mind, it's, Gene McCarthy used to talk to me about the press being like starlings. One goes on a tree, a telephone line, they all follow him. They really do get a lot of follow the leader in this business.
Okay. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk to Seymour Hersh about, if you'll pardon me, the sex life of John F. Kennedy.
You know, Ed, now that I'm also representing Colonial Penn, I really appreciate all the letters from people saying how much it has helped them.
It's amazing. I've been doing this almost 20 years. It's like I did nothing else. But you know, for as little as $6.95 a month, Colonial Penn makes life insurance affordable.
You're right. Listen to this. Dear Alex, I want to thank you for introducing me to such a wonderful company. With Colonial
Penn, the price will never go up. I can keep my monthly expenses down and still get the coverage I want.
Colonial Penn has helped more than 1 million Americans over 50 get whole life insurance without medical exams or health questions. And acceptance is guaranteed.
Dear Ed, when my husband passed away, it was a very hard time for me. What a relief it was to know we had this coverage. I know it can be difficult to get life insurance if you're not in perfect health, but Colonial Penn really came through for me.
As you know, final costs are rising. A funeral alone can cost over $5,000. So it's important to know you can get the coverage you need.
I used to worry about burdening my loved ones. But with benefits that'll never decrease, I know my family won't have to worry about my final expenses. Thank you.
You too can get the coverage you need. Just call this toll-free number.
And you'll get free information. Remember, your acceptance is guaranteed. Premiums never increase. Benefits never decrease because of age. Coverage builds cash value you can borrow against, and it cannot be canceled. Completing your application is easy.
Find out for yourself why thousands of people have written to thank Colonial Penn. Call this toll-free number now.
Call toll-free 1-800-852-2700 to receive free information in the mail. Dial 1-800-852-2700. The call is free, and so is this handy guide to Social Security. Call now. 1-800-852-2700. There's no risk or obligation. That's 1-800-852-2700.
Wednesdays on America's Voice, Tom Jipping and Kathy Cleaver explore the court's influence and impact on today's society. Legal Notebook at its new time, Wednesdays 3 Eastern on America's Voice. There's only one thing Americans agree on.
America's Voice.
America's Voice.
America's Voice.
America's Voice.
Arguably, America's Voice is the best new channel on television. And that's not just our opinion.
America's voice is important to get the message back to Congress.
I think it's a wonderful idea.
In order to change things, you've got to exchange ideas. That's what we do. We're America's voice, turning talk into action.
It's giving us a voice. I'd be very interested in that.
Cy Hirsch, in your new book, The Dark Side of Camelot, we have very explicitly President of the United States in bed with all kinds of women who are not his wife, with the White House taking pictures of him in compromising positions. You quote Secret Service agents on it. I had a publisher, not a liberal publisher, there are some conservative publishers, tell me this has to be exaggerated. He wouldn't have had any time to be president. How do you answer that?
Well, one of the things that's amazing is the Secret Service tell me that if you really look closely at his schedule, there were days he worked hard, and there were days, and I must say I've checked, even his secretary, Evelyn Lincoln's phone logs show only 2 or 3 phone calls a day. That doesn't mean
take the day off.
He just would take the day off. Hey, I don't think presidents have to work as hard as everybody thinks they do anyway. I don't necessarily want him to be a workaholic. All that happened is, I mentioned I started working on Cuba, and one of the things I found was the CIA in a war with the White House by late '62 over this crazy continual pressure from the president and his little brother, the Attorney General Robert Kennedy, to assassinate Castro. They didn't have people there, and it was very reckless. And I'm asking a very decent guy, retired CIA operative, I said, explain this recklessness. And he said, I'll tell you what, if you want to understand John F. Kennedy, and it turns out it was very shrewd advice, go find his agents, his Secret Service agents, the guys who worked the detail. So I followed it, and that's what happened. I went and got retired lists. It's not so easy, but I got the access. As you know, talking to a Secret Service agent is not very easy, and to get 4 to go on the record and go on camera, as you know, they went on an ABC special.
And the head of the Secret Service recently attacked these guys for talking about something that happened 35 years ago.
He sent a circular letter, the new head of the Secret Service, saying even if accurate, shouldn't be talked about. And these guys are hot. Because what happened is, I found the agents and they began to talk to me on the record. They poured out their heart, you might say. Nobody had ever talked to them before, and I knew then I had to write it. Because nobody cares in the Secret Service what a president does. His private life is absolutely his. And they're there to take a bullet. But Jack Kennedy, when his womanizing took place, sometimes they would come in all the time. Sometimes Marilyn Monroe, literally. Sometimes wannabe movie stars that were brought in from California. Sometimes friends. Sometimes friends of friends. Sometimes prostitutes, particularly on the road. They use hookers, really, a lot of times.
He liked prostitutes, didn't he?
Certain safety, I think, in that. A lot of safety in it. You know, you pay your money, and you're not going to get any callbacks the next day. The record, once I got into it, dating back for very early days, a lot of women he was friendly with. He got in trouble with a couple of them. They tried to blackmail him. It's pretty awful stuff. Once he got to the White House, any prostitute, he even knew. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But the point is that what I did was, what they did, what their concern was this. The reason they're talking to me is that they couldn't clear these women. If you go to the White House, I go to the White House. The head of General Motors goes to the White House. He's got to be cleared. The Secret Service has to make sure you've never threatened the president, you don't have a criminal record. That's their job. These guys couldn't clear the woman as they would come in. They couldn't even check their purse for, handguns or knives or tape recorders. And this was a time in which we were eyeball to eyeball with Nikita Khrushchev. There really was a very intense Cold War. It's a little hard for some younger people to remember. But we were in a war with the communists. And Berlin was a tension point. Vietnam was a tension point. Cuba was a tension point. And the notion that we were spying heavily on the Russians and they're spying on us, the notion that the president would let all these women so close to him. Sometimes foreign airline stewardesses would come in off a plane. The White House pimps were Dave Powers and Kenny O'Donnell, his 2 close aides, who were decent guys, but their function was to pimp for the president, and the Secret Service was cut out.
So what do you say to the Kennedy loyalists who say, hey, we'll stipulate that he was a philanderer, an immoral man, but hey, Roosevelt carried on an affair behind Eleanor's back, and Thomas Jefferson supposedly had a slave as a as a mistress. This is not uncommon among presidents. This should not reflect on his status as president. What do you say to that?
I'll give you a better argument. Another one. Ronald Reagan was very loyal, and was he not automatically make him a good president, that he was faithful to his wife? It's a silly criteria. Here's the issue. The issue is, for me, what I saw then was a perfect, as I said, these guys are on the record. They're willing to be quoted. It's a perfect example of recklessness. And you can't, in my view, you can't isolate. You can't be reckless in one little corner of your life and not have it elsewhere. If you remember, I came from Cuba and recklessness about assassination to this private recklessness. It's a continuum. In my theory, in my book anyway, that what we saw in his private life was represented and reflected in the public policy. I do a whole rewrite of the missile crisis, for which I'm getting a lot of brickbats, but I'm going to insist on, I keep on pushing it. John F. Kennedy was, after the Bay of Pigs, if you remember, was the biggest debacle of his career and of the presidency. We tried to invade Cuba and we lost. They were captured and killed. Very embarrassing. Kennedy took the heat, said, I'm responsible publicly. Privately, of course, he complained a lot, as all presidents would, but then he jacked it up. He authorized the CIA, called him Richard Bissell, the head of operations, and he said, I want his butt. Get him. And there was tremendous pressure on the agency to go back to work. He set up a secret operation given the code name Mongoose, brought in an Air Force colonel who worked for the CIA, Ed Lansdale, a very good covert operator, and set him to work with elaborate plans to invade Cuba. The plan called for the invasion of Cuba by October of 1962. By early 62, the largest CIA station in the world was outside of Miami, where 2,000 to 3,000 exiles, Cuban exiles, were on the payroll of the CIA, going from Key West almost nightly into Havana, trying to cause sabotage and terrorism. We use biological agents against the sugarcane crop there. It's basically a war by proxy. And my issue is, Khrushchev knew it in Russia, Fidel Castro knew it in Cuba, Kennedy knew it in the White House, and we didn't know. So when Khrushchev brings his missiles into Cuba, part of the reason he's doing it, certainly the rationale for doing it, the cover, is what Kennedy's doing. And it was very reckless. Kennedy triggered that crisis.
So recklessness on the personal level goes to recklessness on the international level.
That's my thesis.
All of our butts are in danger.
That's my thesis.
We're going to take another break, and when we come back, we'll look at a startling piece of information by Seymour Hersh on how Lyndon Johnson became vice president for Jack Kennedy.
Please direct your attention to the coin toss.
Gentlemen, this is heads, this is tails. Captain, call it in the air.
To commemorate the opening coin toss ceremony, the National Football League commissioned Environment to create an official game coin for each NFL team. And now you can reserve one of these historic game coins for only $59.95. The coin will be used during the opening coin toss of every game this season, but only 7,500 coins can be minted before the mold is destroyed. Each is individually numbered with a certificate of authenticity. The coin is minted with 1 troy ounce of pure silver. And if you call right now, you'll receive this collector's display case absolutely free. Sorry, due to the limited quantity of coins, only advance reservations can be honored. Reserve your official game coin. Have your credit card ready and order this valuable sports collectible today.
To order your official NFL coin, call 1-800-971-5566. Call now.
Tonight on America's Voice. At 6, it's The Michael Reagan Show. Then at 7, watch Armstrong Williams, followed by America's Voice Tonight. America's Voice, turning talk into action.
So often in the closed loop of the Beltway, the will of the people is not heard.
Every day on America's Voice, we bring you the representatives and let you tell them what's on your mind.
America's Voice gives viewers the in-depth discussions, opinions, and views found only on the Sunday morning news programs. But we're able to do it every day, 7 days a week.
Good information is what America's Voice can provide.
America's Voice, turning talk into action.
Introducing Opera's Golden Moments, a magnificent new collection featuring 40 of the most popular songs from opera. Here are some of the best-loved songs of all time. Even if you don't understand the language, the music will touch your heart. Almost 3 hours of brilliant performances by the greatest voices of opera. These are pieces so popular, many of them have been featured in movies and television. So many of the world's most beloved artists. Here's how to order. Call toll-free now for Opera's Golden Moments. 3 cassettes, $24.98. 3 CDs, $29.98. Call now.
Welcome back. I'm Robert Novak with Insights, talking to crack prize-winning investigative reporter Seymour M. Hersh, author of a new book, The Dark Side of Camelot, all about JFK. Cy, you tell a different story than most of the stories that appear in print on how Lyndon B. Johnson became John F. Kennedy's running mate in 1960. The conventional story is that they offered it to him on a pro forma basis, and he snatched it up. You have a different story. What is it?
Well, one of the things you have to say going in is that there's the Kennedy spin was pretty good on this one. Picking Johnson in the 1960 convention was a shock. Everybody sort of guessed it might be Stuart Symington, the senator from Missouri. And all of a sudden, Johnson's picked, and everybody's upset because Johnson was, for a lot of Kennedy's supporters, much too conservative, much too much of an uncouth loudmouth from the South, a Texas boy. And so there were 6 different stories, as you know. You've written about the different issues in one of your books. Anyway, the point is, so there's a problem going in, and I don't know anything about it except I'm interviewing a guy named Hy Raskin. Hy Raskin's an old Chicago pol who worked for Adlai Stevenson in 52 and 56. In those campaigns, he lost to Ike Eisenhower, and then in 57, hired secretly by Joe Kennedy. Joe Kennedy is the most interesting guy of all. The old bootlegger, the father, the patriarch. He's a bootlegger who went to own Hollywood studios by the late 1930s. Joe Kennedy understood spin control 25 years before the rest of it.
Great womanizer, too, huh?
Oh, yeah, but that's why he wasn't president. Who cares, you know? The same with, other people, who cares? But he understood that this beautiful child of his, this indifferent senator who had not a great senator, could be run as a movie star, and did so, and successfully. Okay, so he's got him at the convention. He's picked. Raskin's story is this. Raskin was running communications for the Kennedy campaign. He's an insider, not widely known publicly. And so, by the way, I find Raskin in 95. I go interview him a couple of times. I get some nice things out of him.
He's now dead.
He dies a couple of months after my second interview. He lived in one of those Rancho Mirage or something like that outside of Los Angeles, in the desert, 29 Palms in that area. And I and his second wife went to dinner a couple of times. We had a nice time. Old, great geezer, great old pal.
I knew him. I covered him in 1960, yeah.
White hair, avuncular.
Very, very colorful fellow.
Very colorful fellow. He dies. A couple of months later, I call up his widow. I'm a nice guy, I believe it or not. And I call up to say, I'm so sorry. How you doing? And she says, he had an unpublished manuscript. He never decided not to publish it. Man, I'm out there. Do you want to look at it? And I said, I happen to be coming tomorrow, into Kinko's, bam, bam.
Don't give it to anybody else.
Don't give it to anybody else. So I get a copy. There's a long chapter on what I'm telling you now. The story is simply, it was always Symington. Even Joe signs off. He's running communications. He goes to bed. Jack's nominated on a Wednesday night. Everybody applauds. Thursday, he's supposed to announce early in the morning that it's going to be Symington. He goes to bed, Raskin, with Symington, wakes up in the next morning. It's Johnson. He doesn't know what the hell happened. He sees Jack later in the day, and Jack liked him because he was older. And Jack takes him aside and says, "Hi, you got to understand." He said, "He threatened me. He made me, as Raskin described it, he gave me an offer I couldn't refuse," the old line for the organized crime. He threatened me. He was going to go public with things. He was going to hurt me. I got enough trouble with Nixon as it is. I don't need it. It never was clear. Raskin never had any idea what the threat was. I speculate in his book, because I know so much about John F. Kennedy, that it had to be linked to something with the lady, but that's not, there's no empirical evidence. What I did then is after Raskin told me this story, Clark Clifford, who was Symington's aide, is very ill now, but he was pretty ill then. But I always liked Clark Clifford, and I got along with him.
And he was a great troubleshooter for Johnson, too, when Johnson was president.
And he became Secretary of Defense, and
Right.
began to turn the war around.
Yep.
And an interesting man, not always, he perfectly prepared to be a pol. But in this case, he told me a story he'd never said before. He said that Symington was picked, and Jack had to come to him that Thursday morning, early in the morning, and said, Jack was a very decent guy. Jack was a totally likable guy, and really a very decent, totally charming, really. And Jack went to Symington. Stu, he said, I'm sorry, I have to renege. And so I like that story. Clifford tells me that story. I haven't heard that story from Clifford before. And then Raskin told me that Johnson, as was his wont, couldn't keep his mouth shut. He had a great buddy named John Knight, who was publisher of the Miami Herald. And
now the Knight Ritter newspaper.
Oh, yeah, now huge. But then it was just but John Knight still was a powerful guy in publishing and very close to Linden. And sure enough, Friday morning, Raskin said, go take a look at the paper. And I went down to the archives, and I found in the Library of Congress a beautiful Friday morning, the day after Johnson's pick, banner headline, how Johnson forced his way onto the ticket. So all of this makes me think it's arguable that Raskin's account makes some sense. And by the way, everybody said Johnson gave him Kennedy, Texas, but Symington would have given them, in their polling, would have given them California, which they lost in a very narrow election. Nixon won California, which would have been much better than winning Texas. So anyway, it's worth writing. I just proffer it as yet another story that Johnson had some meat. And what makes it really credible for me is Kennedy, and every account had Sam Rayburn and Johnson together. And one thing about Lyndon Johnson, he was not confrontational. But Sam Rayburn, if Sam Rayburn tells John F. Kennedy he's going to be vice president or you're in trouble, John F. Kennedy's got to listen to that, because Rayburn did not mince words. I like the story.
And it really changed history, didn't it?
Oh, if it's true. But it's one of those great stories where the Kennedys had, let's see, Reston had a different, James Reston of the New York Times, Arthur Kroc, Teddy White. If you look at Phil Graham of the Washington Post, they spun different stories to everybody.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about Scotty Reston, the late Scotty Reston, famous editor, columnist of the New York Times, in connection with something else, at least indirectly, JFK and Vietnam.
Can your radio do this? Only one radio can give you stereo sound this big, yet is small enough to fit almost anywhere. The extraordinary Wave Radio from Bose. Press the remote control and hear big, rich sound that fills the room. Sound so rich, Popular Science called it a sonic marvel. You hear music the way it was meant to be heard. Clear, full, incredibly lifelike. You've got to hear the Wave Radio to believe it, and now you can, satisfaction guaranteed. Call toll-free to hear it in your home. Ask about our free shipping offer and 6-month payment plan. Experience big stereo sound from a radio. Call today. It will make a difference in the way you listen to music. A big difference.
America's Voice, turning talk into action.
One unforgettable voice.
Unforgettable.
One unforgettable night.
Thank you so much.
Now, the only concert of Nat King Cole ever filmed can be yours. An Evening with Nat King Cole. This one-hour performance features Nat singing hits such as Mona Lisa.
Mona Lisa.
A must for all fans and a great gift idea. This rare concert is not available in stores.
When I fall in love.
Call now and receive this special companion video as a bonus. The incomparable Nat King Cole features more great songs with special guests such as Ella Fitzgerald and the Oscar Peterson Trio. Right now, you can receive both video cassettes featuring over 30 great hits through this special television offer, so act now.
For Visa, MasterCard, or American Express, call 1-800-550-6244 or send check or money order today.
You got us a piece of the frontier for $8.
I sold 99 cents for $12.
Yes, I do.
At Ameritrade, we never forget it's your money. That's why we built our business on bringing you fast, accurate trades and seriously low commissions.
I saved on the rainforest, 18 bucks.
Trade over the internet for $8, by touch-tone phone for $12, or with a broker for just $18, no matter how many shares you buy or sell.
I landed on Saturn for $18.
After 23 years, we're not exactly new at this. Hey, we were the first to trade on the internet. Check out Ameritrade.com or phone 1-800-976-4646. Open an account by April 15th and get a free IRA for life.
I dropped Philip for Parker, Parker for Johnson, Johnson for Cole.
It doesn't get much easier than this. Check out Ameritrade.com or phone 1-800-976-4646 today.
Finally, I found paradise.
Ameritrade, the way to trade, period.
Seymour Horsch, in your book, The Dark Side of Camelot, one of the really gripping things was the encounter that the young President Kennedy had with Nikita Khrushchev at their meeting in Vienna, where Khrushchev came down really hard at him. And President Kennedy had a little private meeting with Scotty Reston, James B. Reston of the New York Times, one of the really powerful figures in Washington in those days. And what did, and you record, what did the president tell Reston?
First of all, I told him how rough it was, which, by the way, Mr. Reston did not write in his stories. He wrote, his stories did the press briefing line. He did.
Let me just do an aside. Through your whole book, you record reporters who didn't report what they knew. Isn't that, it's a chronic thing. But anyway, go ahead.
That's our town.
Yeah.
You know, that's our town. That happens today, too. I would argue it's better than it was 35 years ago.
Yeah.
And anyway, but one of the things John F. Kennedy said, we've got a place to strike back. It's called Vietnam. And one of the things that upset me the most, you're the first journalist, first interviewer to ask me about this, I have to say. One of the things that was really troubling is Jack Kennedy, I mentioned the Bay of Pigs. He suffers this terrible loss. The White House tried to blame the Eisenhower administration, which had initiated a plan for an insurrection. But what Jack Kennedy did is he changed his small-scale plan into a major external invasion. And he also added an assassination element to it. The CIA was going to try and hit Castro before the invasion. Everything went wrong. He was embarrassed, and he was mad. 4 days later, going through documents, I find this incredible memo from McGeorge Bundy through Walt Rosta, one of the National Security Council aides. McGeorge Bundy was the National Security Advisor to the President, the Harvard Dean. I have to say this. One of the thoughts I have is I think we should keep Harvard professors away from government for the, maybe next 50 years. We'd all be better off. Really amazing. Yeah. Anyway, so the memo to Kennedy from McGeorge Bundy via Rostow says this, among the things. It says, it's sort of, where do we stand now? We've had this terrible defeat. We look weak. The Russians now, Nikita Khrushchev now thinks we're really weak, helpless, pitiful giant, as Henry Kissinger would say 20 years later or 10 years later. And he says, there is a place, Mr. President, we can regain our honor and our prestige. It's called Vietnam, South Vietnam. It's a place where we can go in and show the Russians we're tough. And it brought the hair up my God, I always thought there was something more meaningful about Vietnam. And I really don't, Jack Kennedy's performance in Vietnam, I think, was the most cynical performance of any president we've ever had in a major war. He did not believe we could win the war, but he continually kept it going. He authorized napalm. This is for a side deal to show the Russians how strong we are. He kept it going. He juiced it up. Eisenhower left 200 people there.
Now, the Kennedy apologists, Professor Schlesinger and all these people say that one of the last speeches the president made was his famous dovish foreign policy speech at the American University here in Washington, and that this was the signal that he was getting out of Vietnam, and if he hadn't died and Johnson come in as a hawk, this tragedy could have been averted. What do you say to that from your research?
Well, the thing I do on that is, let's assume, we don't know, but we can't say what he would have done. But I don't think Jack Kennedy believed the war was winnable. If you remember, the Secretary of Defense, Mr. McNamara, Robert McNamara, published a book about 3 or 4 years ago called In Retrospect that enraged everybody because he said he never thought we could win it. This is a guy shipping people down to the war. He didn't believe the war was winnable. I think Kennedy also didn't think it was winnable. As I said, Eisenhower began, when he got in, there were 200 troops there. When Kennedy died, there were 17,000. We had napalm, we had defoliation, the pilots were flying. He escalated quite a bit. I think he did want to get out, but not until the 1964 election. Kennedy had won by a very small plurality, 112,000 votes, fewer votes than there were precincts, electoral precincts in America. Really, I think he wanted a big victory. I think he thought the Republicans would probably go with Goldwater. I think he thought he could handle Goldwater. I think he was looking for 60%. He did not want to do anything about Vietnam. Let's assume he wanted to get out. He did not want to do anything about Vietnam until after the next election. And meanwhile, it turns out from my research in the book, I was stunned to find this. It turns out in the middle of 1963, the president of the South Vietnam, Diem, a tough anti-communist, was nonetheless, and a great Catholic and a friend of the Kennedy family, was nonetheless beginning to negotiate with Ho Chi Minh, because neither one...
That's one of the great revelations.
And by the way, it's just there. It's just a fact. Neither one wanted the Americans there. So Kennedy, this guy gave him an opportunity to get out, but Diem's problem was he gave it to Kennedy at the wrong time, so he had to go. He had to die. Kennedy had him overthrown, leaving us deeper and deeper. He was overthrown and killed, murdered 3 weeks before Kennedy's own assassination. So Kennedy, far from doing the right thing, he had a chance in '63 to get out, but he didn't take it for one reason only. It came at the wrong time. Yeah. And we don't pay presidents to keep wars going for political purposes. Johnson and Nixon, whatever you think of their policy, and I was against both of them, believed in that war. I think they were both wrong. It ruined both of their careers, publicly anyway, but they both believed in something, and Kennedy did not. I think that's much worse.
One more thing on Vietnam, very chilling thing in the book. You have this conversation between the President Kennedy, and General Lonsdale, Ed Lonsdale, great guy I knew, a CIA operative, about how they could separate new President Diem's brother-in-law from him. And then he asks, if you can't do this, can you get rid of him? And what does Lonsdale say to him?
Lonsdale says two things. He's very deferential. He says, I'm a Catholic, Mr. President. He said, and I just can't do that for you. He said, I'm a Catholic, he said. And I don't think we can, I'm not going to do it. And you have to understand what nobody understood except only a few people. Lansdale had spent the previous year working on Cuba. And so when the president says get rid of him, Arthur Schlesinger said that just mean, overthrow him. He knows he's not talking about. When the president says to Ed Lansdale, can you get rid of somebody, Lansdale's going to go out and start buying a sidearm. He knows what that means. I don't have a video camera. I can't prove it. There's plausible deniability. But there's no question that Lansdale understood that the president had asked him to do something bloody if need be. And by the way, what's wonderful to me about that, New was the one who was popping off Diem's brother about Americans. He didn't like Americans at all. And Jack Kennedy, who with his brother were so close, Bobby and Jack, the only person that understood what Jack was doing at all times was Bobby. The notion that he thought he could separate those two brothers is really interesting.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take another break, and when we come back, we will have a final interview segment with Seymour Hersh to talk about the dark side of Camelot.
Wednesdays on America's Voice, Tom Jipping and Kathy Cleaver explore the court's influence and impact on today's society. Legal Notebook at its new time, Wednesdays, 3 Eastern on America's Voice.
Your financial status. Before Barron's. And after Barron's. Barron's. It's how money becomes wealth. Every week, Barron's scours the investment world for growth opportunities with comprehensive coverage of stocks, bonds, mutual funds, everything that could affect your finances. Use your credit card to subscribe now, and you'll get 17 weeks of Barron's for the price of 13. That's 4 more opportunities to turn money into wealth. Get 17 weeks of Barron's for only $39. That's 4 weeks free. Call now toll-free in the continental U.S. 800-714-3100. That's 800-714-3100.
fundraising and campaign organization. Can these two things be possible? Now, Free Congress Foundation provides you an insight into conservative values in American politics with the Kriebel Institute educational video and audio tape series. From framing the issues to managing the media, each tape series is designed to provide you with helpful guidelines relating to almost every campaign and election topic. Harness your political energy today. For information on how to order your tape series, call 1-800-638-0660.
Today, Microsoft makes the internet faster. Today, the next wave in internet software is free for a month. Today, you can get online faster and go where you want in no time. Today, the internet is just a click away.
It was the best of times.
See for yourself. MSN Premier is free for a month when you call 1-800-255-7043. Microsoft helps you make the most of the internet right on your Windows 95-based PC with sound, motion, and more. Send email that gets through. Get the news as it happens. Plan and book a trip. Manage your investments. And find exactly what you want with Microsoft Internet Explorer. Call 1-800-255-7043 for your free month today. You'll get a free CD with the latest internet software from Microsoft.
It's just really extraordinary to see what you can do.
And unlimited hours online. Free for a month. So call today, and you're on your way.
Cy Hirsch, of the many really startling things you say in The Dark Side of Camelot, we just ran a little quote saying that Bobby Kennedy said that he did not want to get to the truth about the assassination of his brother because of the things that it might reveal about the Kennedy family. That's really shocking.
Well, actually, I begin the book with the aftermath of the assassination. We're literally within hours. Robert Kennedy went into what only can be described, there's no other word for it, a cover-up mode. He was back in Washington when Jack got killed. Within 2 hours of the assassination, the Secret Service agents, and I quote one by name, carefully quote him and good quotes, and I saw him in '95, were sent into the president's office to dismantle what had been a major secret, the fact that John F. Kennedy was tape recording all of his conversations, all those he wanted to, and all of his phone conversations. That system was dismantled within an hour or two, 2 hours, let's say, of Jack's death. Robert Kennedy then immediately authorized his files, his brother's personal files and presidential files, to be sealed and moved. They were moved overnight. It was as if Attila the Hun, instead of a fellow Democrat, was coming in. So,
and great cover-ups, wasn't it?
Awesome. For example, 200 reels of tapes were taken into and locked into, put into 24-hour armed guard into a room in the executive office building across the street, in which only the Robert Kennedy, Jacqueline, and one aide were permitted for the next 3 or 4 years. The Kennedy family really did a great control. He also called, Bobby called a man named Julius Drosnin of Chicago, who was an expert for the federal government on labor racketeering. And Julius is still alive. It was a great interview. Julius said to me, about 4 or 5 hours after Jack was killed, he was told to go home to his apartment in the Hyde Park section, south side of Chicago, where Bobby did call. And Bobby said, Julius, set up a team and find out if Sam Giancana killed my brother. And so Julius, who knew his way around Chicago, got 3 or 4 fellow...
This is Sam Giancana, the mobster who had connections with
Sam Giancana, the guy they used to help win the election in my book, who was also brought into the assassination plotting, he was the follow-on to Al Capone. This is basically a guy who murders people for a living, a very smart, tough mob guy. Anyway, Drasnin set up a team, investigated for 3 or 4 months. I've got some of his papers. Drasnin, when Ruby shoots Oswald, a couple days later, Drasnin team did a better piece of paper on Jack Ruby, a.k.a. Jack Rubenstein, and also known as Jack Rubenstein, than the Warren Commission had. None of this Robert Kennedy shared to the Warren Commission. And the end of my book, it ends with Earl Warren, the head of the Warren Commission, the Supreme Court Justice, asking the Attorney General Robert Kennedy in the spring of '64, about 6 months after his brother's death, sending him a formal letter saying, do you have anything to add or anything of relevance to our investigation? And Bobby says, not a thing. He's protecting not only his brother's reputation, but is also his own political future. At this time, he knows that Giancana's been involved, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you think he was involved in the assassination?
No, I don't know. I don't know evidence.
Cy, the I've been, just for light reading last summer, I was reading some books about Andrew Jackson and Sam Houston, and they were really bad guys. A lot of bad stuff came out about them. Ambrose Evans Pritchard, the British journalist, has written a book about this called The Secret Life of Bill Clinton, which reminds me of your book, only it's in real time. Is there something about the very nature of government that attracts dysfunctional people, and there's a tendency to cover up in deception?
Well, you know, you have to, somebody who wants to spend a large part of his life telling 260 million people what to do, they've got a certain amount of self-assurance and a certain amount of, it's an enormously, you're exposed so dramatically that, and you're also so attractive to women. There's part of that. I mean, the power, you know, as Henry Kissinger did say very correctly, it's a great aphrodisiac power. And so I don't think that's so illogical. I don't begrudge, by the way, anybody, anything he does in private. What you see with this guy, Bill Clinton, is what you get. I don't see any evidence that that side of his life is impacting on foreign policy, as I argue it did with Jack Kennedy. I don't see it out of control. Yes, there's something strange about somebody who wants to tell everybody else what to do. So you do get a certain kind of person that wants to be president. It doesn't mean that certain standards can't apply. And I think we've had presidents, Ronald Reagan, one of the things, I did a book on the Korean Air shoot-down, and one of the great moments in life is that the Russians shoot down the Korean airliner, if you remember, 12, 14, 15 years ago, and everybody wants Russian blood. And Ronald Reagan is chopping wood that day, and spends the day chopping wood. Everybody, Bill Casey, all of the aides are saying, we've got a cheap, we've got a free hit. We can do anything we want, and the world will support us. And Reagan said, I think I'm just going to chop wood. So that, you know, there's a certain, in Ronald Reagan, there was a certain sense of manhood that he didn't feel he had to prove it all the time. And I like that in a president. I like a president, you know, so.
I'm going to ask you something to finish up that I often ask people I interview on this program. Is the Cy Hirsch of 1997 less liberal than the Cy Hirsch of 1968?
Oh, no. I'm still, in my heart, I'm a liberal. I'm also a professional journalist, though. And I worked for the AP for years, and I remember one lesson I learned from the AP, when you have something in front of it, you report it. You can go back the next day and do an analysis. We used to call it a Q header, where you can do an analysis piece. But what I report, what I find.
So you report what the stuff, where it leads you.
Look, I actually believe in something called truth, as illusionary as that is. And yes, I think I'm as liberal as ever, but I'm also a professional journalist. And what I found is what I found.
Cy Hirsch, thanks very much. I'll be back with a comment after these final messages.
Tonight on America's Voice, at 5, it's Direct Line. Then the Michael Reagan Show, followed by Armstrong Williams at 7. Tonight on America's Voice, turning talk into action.
The fastest way to lower your score is to get it on the green. And from 185 to 225 yards, the Tight Lies fairway wood from Adams Golf gets you there.
The Tight Lies, it kind of goes up like a 7 wood, but the distance is just amazing.
This one-of-a-kind tri-level sole design makes it almost effortless to hit from any lie on the course. Perfect lies, sand traps, long rough, divots. No lie is too tough for the Tight Lies.
I have never seen a golf club get more dramatic results with players immediately than the Tight Lies, period.
Get the Tight Lies, get it on the green, and take strokes off your game.
It's just absolutely amazing. It's changed my whole game.
It's 3 clubs rolled into one.
You know, the results is really what I like about it. You know, it works.
Call the number on your screen now for your free Tight Lies video and information, and get it on the green with the Tight Lies fairway wood from Adams Golf.
Hello. My name's Larry Klayman, and 3 years ago I formed Judicial Watch to use citizen action to restore ethics and morality to our government and legal systems. The response was overwhelming, and volunteer attorneys and others, giving of their free time, joined with me to find John Wong, expose the campaign finance scandal, and possible Chinese espionage. Recently, we filed a class action suit in the Filegate controversy, and will soon be deposing under oath Hillary Clinton and Dick Morris. We have proven that through volunteerism, needed change can be effected in our country. We call upon all of you to join Judicial Watch or another citizens action group of your choice. We can no longer look to Congress or the Justice Department to do our job. If you'd like more information about Judicial Watch, call me at 888-JW-ETHIC or write to me at Post Office Box 44444, Washington, D.C. 20026.
Now, there's a television network that actually listens to you. A network concerned with your issues and your opinions. We're America's Voice, the only network designed exclusively to listen to the voice of the people. It's live, interactive, and thought-provoking. America's Voice keeps Washington in touch with you. We're your voice, America's Voice, turning talk into action.
This is one interview that there just wasn't enough time to cover all the material in Cy Hirsch's book, The Dark Side of Camelot. For example, we barely touched the surface of the mob connections of Joe Kennedy and of Jack Kennedy. But the interesting thing about this book is that here is an establishment reporter, Associated Press, New York Times, Atlantic, New Yorker, praised, Pulitzer Prize winner, a hero of the liberals. But the minute he began to tell the truth about this story, he is a pariah. He is denounced. He is called deceitful by his old paper, the New York Times. They're wrong. This is a very interesting and a very credible book. I'm Robert Novak with Insights.
This is Shirley Calhoun from Fredericksburg, Virginia, and you're watching America's Voice.
Now, you can get this free AM/FM mini boombox and put cash in your pocket when you dine out. Simply try dining a la carte absolutely free for 60 days and get 20% cash back when you dine at participating restaurants. Act now and get this free mini boombox.
You mean you're going to pay me to dine out at great restaurants like this and give me a free mini boombox? What's the catch?
There is no catch. Dining a la carte simply wants to prove that you can enjoy great food and make good money when you dine at any of their 6,500 restaurants. To get started, call for your 60-day free trial and register any Visa, MasterCard, Discover, or American Express credit card. Have breakfast, lunch, or dinner at a participating restaurant. Use your registered credit card and automatically get a check each month for 20% off your entire bill, including beverages, tax, and tip. With dining a la carte, you never use embarrassing coupons or ID cards. It's discreet, so not even your guests or waiter know you're getting 20% cash back. Here's how much cash you can get back each month. If you spend $25 a week dining out, you'll get a monthly check for $20. Spend $50 a week and get a monthly check for $40. Spend $100 and get $80 back. The more you dine out, the more you make.
Thanks to dining a la carte, I enjoy great meals at my favorite restaurants and get back about $80 each month.
Call now for your free 60-day trial and mini boombox. Remember, all the money you earn during your free trial is yours to keep.
Call 1-800-750-0975. Register your Visa, MasterCard, Discover, or American Express credit card and activate your 60-day free trial. That's 1-800-750-0975. Pay nothing for 60 days. Your satisfaction is guaranteed. Call now. 1-800-750-0975.
I'm Paul Wyrick, host of Direct Line. Very soon you'll be seeing some exciting changes at NET, including our name to America's Voice. But some things won't be changing, like our commitment to covering Washington, our in-depth analysis and insightful discussions and viewpoints. For more programming information, call our toll-free hotline. Watch the network that listens to you. America's Voice, turning talk into action.